That was an awkward start. Hey, welcome everybody. I'm Bob Krell. I'm your host and founder and publisher of Healthy Indoors Magazine. And thanks for joining us this Thursday. Some of you may be watching us live. Some of you may be watching us recorded after the fact. These are all good ways to get to us. We are live streaming on the Healthy Indoors online global community right now, as well as on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and several other places. So, great show coming up today. We're going to be answering the question of how is there another methodology that we may be able to start assessing mold in the indoor environment. And joining us today will be two great guests, but I first want to put a little pitch out here for the Healthy Indoors online community, because in the event you're not watching the show live on the community, you probably should be, and you can watch it afterwards here. All right. So, the community is a platform that we've had out there for in beta for about a year now, but we're really actively promoting it. And this is like where we live stream from and all other kinds of stuff. It's not just really a content place, but it's more of a networking and a literal online community where you can engage with others from all over the world on various different disciplines. So, anyway, today's show is kind of interesting. We're joined today by Dr. Michael Pinto from Wonder Makers Environmental, and Rachel Rubelay from she's director of laboratory operations at Air Answers. I almost jumped in and said the old company name. It happens.
It's okay.
Yeah, I know. So Michael is a long time consultant and professional in this industry. He's well known in many spheres. He's been around. I guess as long as me, right? Probably. I mean, we're old
you're,
now.
you're really skating on thin
I
ice there,
know. Well,
Robert.
no,
Thank
but
you
I mean
very
it in a
much.
very affectionate and positive way.
40
You've been involved
years,
as a
my
consultant, a
friend.
trainer. You've been actively involved with organizations, doing presentations at industry conferences, and writing papers, authoring articles. We'll get to that in a moment. Also, you've been active on many committees,
Yeah,
standard setting and everything. So,
yeah, that's what
yeah.
happens when you've been doing this for 4 decades.
So you actually have been doing it 40 years. Wow. So
Yeah,
Wow.
so you've been there a little longer than me, because I'm at like 36 now.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. You were
Well,
just a baby when
I was a
you came
child. I was
in.
only 14 when I started. No, not at all. So Rachel, you're the newcomer. So,
No,
so
I'm the newbie here.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So today's show has been is predicated. Michael authored an article in Healthy Indoors magazine. Actually, uh, back in April and May. It ran. It was a two-part series talking about a comparison of Air Answer sampling technology to standard sport samples for mold investigations. And interesting, very interesting read. If you haven't read it thus far, we'll have the links in the comments available. But certainly. It raises some questions, as to what maybe we can do with this new technology. So I guess without further ado, we'll get into it a little bit, right? The Again, it's a new technology in that you've been out for a couple years though, right? Since
Yeah.
you So it's not that new. It's not like it came out last week. Um,
Well, I think, Bob, I'm going to cut in for just a second though,
please do.
because the interesting thing about this is that the Air Answers technology has been out there for multiple years, but they were focused on the allergen sector of the industry. So they really came up with this technology and found out that it worked great to measure airborne allergens, and so cat and dog allergens and dust mites and all of that stuff. And that was their initial focus. And now they're um, understanding, and that's where we came in, helped them to understand that the technology is actually very useful in the mold arena as well as for the allergens. So that was one of the things that attracted me to them, is that it wasn't like you said, it wasn't, well, we're 2 weeks old and we think we can make a difference in the mold arena. Yeah, okay, come back to me in a couple of years, right?
Mhm.
Because you and I have both seen the latest flash in the pan, whether it be a chemical or a piece of equipment or sampling or whatever it is. And then it just doesn't have any legs, and
Mhm.
you don't want to be associated with it. This one is very different. I'm excited about it. I'm intrigued, I think is probably the best word. Absolutely intrigued by it, because I still don't understand all of the things that I think it might be able to do for us.
Well, I know we had Rachel on the show last year, earlier last year. We talked about this technology a bit back then,
Yeah.
and it is unique in that there's a lot of different layers to it. It's almost like peeling the skin of the onion, right? I mean, there's
Oh, it
you can do a lot with it.
really is. We can do a lot with it. Like Michael was saying, our main focus before was allergens, and then we found out, wow, this device captures all types of biological contaminants in the air. And what else can we capture with this? And what other assays can we develop to in the laboratory to detect these particular contaminants? So we've kind of evolved over to different kinds of molds. So we test mold to the genus level. We have powdery mildew for the cannabis growers. That's very important to them. We're actually able to detect COVID, so we've been able to do that. Viruses, which are particles down to zero point 0.1 micron in size. And then we're constantly looking at what we can add next, what assays people want, so then we can add that to our laboratory menu.
So, Michael, you got again. This was you came to us with this article a few months back, proposing doing it, and I was like, yeah, this seems interesting because obviously this is it's a new twist to collection, right? It's not the assays, the actual analysis is all standard analysis protocols for the most part. Although I did see that you've got Rachel, something called LAL. We can get into that a little bit later,
Mhm.
which is that's a proprietary thing that you guys do.
It's actually it's beta glucan.
Okay.
It uses a certain type of pathway called the LAL, but it's a beta glucan assay where we detect actively growing mold.
Okay. Um, so, Michael, give us a little bit of a rundown of what you mentioned that you saw this technology and you knew that it was being used. I'm assuming that you were interested in it initially for allergen testing, and you know, or how
Actually,
did I guess the question is to both of you. How do we get to using this for mold?
okay. So from my perspective, it was a little bit more straightforward than that. I wasn't much aware of the technology, and I do my best to, you know, read Healthy Indoors and look at the ads and talk to people and get to as many shows as I can and that sort of stuff. And actually met the Air Answers people at a trade show, and then just being the jerk that I am, I always go up and talk to people and, you know, pressure them with questions about how the things work and what's going on. And uh, of course, they were able to answer all sorts of interesting questions. And the next thing you know, we're developing a bit of a relationship and starting to figure out how we might be able to help one another.
And so this study, Rachel, this study was done with multiple people did this, or was this just something that you did? You partnered with Wonder Makers to do this. I know for the
Yeah,
article it was Wonder Makers, but
this was actually done through Doug Hoffman in Florida. So we worked with some of the indoor air quality specialists who were in Florida, and we did the testing with them. So
oh, okay. So I was under the impression that Michael did it. So that's my first mistake of today's show. Um,
Well, the answer there is that the sample collection and the development of the sampling protocol and everything that was done between Air Answers and Normie, and then um, as often happens in a situation like that, you generate this massive amount of data, and so we were um, thrilled and pleased that they thought that we might be the people who could help make sense
Yeah.
Got
out
it.
of all this information, just because of the experience in the industry. And as you well know, Bob, we've done these sorts of papers, and just having somebody else look at the data that isn't part of the Air Answers
Yeah.
team.
Mhm. Well, you're no
Because there's
stranger
so
to
many
white papers. Michael's
analysis.
definitely no stranger to the white papers. Um,
Oh, he did an amazing job. And also, he was good at taking all the data and putting that into a story that makes sense. Because with his vast experience, he has the ability to look at that and know exactly what those numbers mean and how to put those together. So it was,
and that's, honestly, that's, having been a consultant for a lot of years in this industry myself, that's one of the things that understanding, be able, collecting data is not nearly as hard as being able to decipher what data means. you know,
exactly.
you're a
Oh
Exactly.
yeah.
technician as far as collecting data, but it actually, gleaning some, some valuable information is tough. Um, so you mentioned, Rachel, you mentioned earlier, just you briefly touched on ability to detect viruses such as
Yeah.
SARS-CoV-2.
Yes.
So yeah, so that's tell us a little bit more about that. I'm just curious. Not
Well,
not to get off
we
on a tangent,
actually
but you piqued my interest.
Ooh, well, that's great. We actually have done quite a few studies. We've been in a study with, and we're mentioned in a paper through the University of Nebraska. They used our device for COVID analysis in a school, and they used it to compare the air testing to the surface testing. So we were able to show that we were able to detect COVID in that particular school. We've also done studies with the University of Chicago, which showed COVID detection in hospital settings. And we were also able to we did 2 environmental chamber studies where we collected COVID in an environmental chamber. So we've been able to validate that our device does in fact capture SARS-CoV-2, which has been wonderful.
So that I would think that that technology would also be applicable maybe for other
Yes.
airborne born viruses, right? So any type
Yep.
of pathogen, really. It's so I guess one of the key points here is that you're able to capture very small particles.
Yes,
Yeah.
down to zero point 0.1 microns, which is like viruses. So we're
Mhm.
able to collect those. So one of the interesting thing is in developing some of our menus that we have in the laboratory is we're looking at certain viruses that people are interested in, bacteria, and there's just so many things that we can do with this device.
So Michael, so in reviewing this data for the articles, and I'm assuming, I've known you a lot of years, so I'm sure you went in objectively, and I'm that way too. We've spent so many decades in the industry. I always have a bit of skepticism on anything because I've had a lot of things shoveled my way that weren't, really weren't accurate. So, but when we did the interview with Rachel last year, definitely, and I met those guys prior to it, about a year prior to that, at a industry trade show. Very interested in this whole technology.
Mhm.
Um, so in your article, you proposed this as maybe an augment to an augment, uh, an analytical, not analytical, but a capture protocol, or maybe something that could even be competitive against our standard sport trap.
Mm-hmm.
So
S-
that being
Uh,
said, so what are your thoughts on that?
I'll have to apologize on that one, Bob, because you cut out, and I
Oh,
think it might have been my internet connection there. We don't have the most stable here at
oh,
the
that's okay. So my
office.
question for you, Michael, was, is so you had the chance to review this data on the Air Answers collection, comparing it small field study. It's a 5 house field study,
Right. Yep.
um, versus Sport Trap, standard Sport Trap collection, and so get to the short order. What are you finding that came out that surprised you or new and different?
Okay. So two main things really hit me, and one was, if it is going to be something that is going to be useful in the industry, um, then we should be getting some similarity, if not, 100% matching with other sampling systems. Uh, if Air Answers comes in and says we are so different that you can't even compare your past results to what we're doing, that would give me pause and say, well, I'm really, aren't we measuring the same air? Now, I think everybody who's done this for a little bit understands that there's that whole variability issue. You can run two spore trap samples side by side and have different numbers. But if you do enough samples side by side, uh, you should be able to start see some similarities in the data. And so that was the first thing that I was excited about, is that there is that similarity, but not exact sameness between what we're getting on the mold side with the Air Answers and what we were getting with spore traps. So that was exciting. Um, the other thing that I found very interesting was by adding the beta glucans and the mycotoxins to the air sampling, which I'm not familiar with absolutely every sampling methodology in the world, but those are things that haven't seen in practical use in our field anyway. To be able to get the mycotoxins with all of the input that we're getting on mycotoxins these days, and the interest that we're getting on that area from the doctors and the contractors that then have to clean this stuff up. Uh, to me, that was exciting to see that on the Air Answers. And then to find out that, fortunately, not every house that has spores in it in the air has mycotoxins in the air. And that matches up with my common sense as well, that the mycotoxins are only produced by certain molds, and generally when they're under stress, right? You can have Stachybotrys, but if it's fat and sassy and living in a water damaged piece of drywall that's not being, you know, attacked by bacteria or other sorts of mold, why would it waste time creating poisons, which is basically what the mycotoxins are? So there just was a whole lot of stuff from, admittedly, as you said, a very small sample size that still seemed to validate some of the, um, you know, new uh, opportunities that the Air Answers brings to the field.
One of the things that this graphic was from the article that we published a few months back, and what I found striking is that when on the far left you're comparing a typical spore trap sample. So the standard I would say would be 5 minutes at 15 liters per minute. So you're collecting about 75 liters of air in a typical spore trap, very short excursion, a 5-minute excursion. And in this small study, Rachel, right, and Michael, you did multiple intervals. That's why you have multiple Air Answers devices. There are 1 hour, a 2 hour, I think there's a 3 hour, and then there was like a 1 day and 5 day. Did I leave one out?
No, that sounds about right.
Actually, there were two 1 hour.
Well, 1 hour. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
it was
that's
2 hour.
how you get six there. But those are the intervals. Exactly
Mhm.
right.
So that in of itself is unique because we're used to, and again, I would argue that Spore Trap is, we've had other guests on in the past that have really challenged Spore Trap as the de facto default for, mold consulting, and I'm a consultant too, and I think it's a tool in the belt, but certainly there's vast limitations in Spore Trap in sampling and analysis and interpretation across the board, right? I mean, but it is a tool that is commonly used, to your article, Michael. It's very regularly used. So I guess that's the one to compare it against. Not necessarily saying that spore traps are the gold standard for what we should be doing, but they are what we are doing.
Mhm.
Leaving it at
So,
that. So this is unique that you can take different, extended intervals in a space, correct?
Yeah.
well, I
Well,
think,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was going to cut in and just add to the other
No.
point there, Bob, that they're all tools. And that's the attitude that I take in the industry, is that, you can do a great inspection without taking samples, but a lot of times you do need the samples depending on what you're doing with your inspection. And the key in my mind is to understand what is it that the Air Answers can bring to us, that it's a tool that other tools can't. And so to me, that's what we really want to start to focus on, is how can this tool be useful to the indoor air quality professional, because it offers something that some of the other tools do not.
I mean, one of the key points I would say that that we have limitations with spore traps in that it's a very short excursion, it's a very limited volume of air, and the collection efficiency as far as the actual distance, far from the collection point isn't very far. So we're sticking a tripod in an environment. We're looking at one little volume of air, effectively what 2.5 cubic feet ish of air. So that's a volume of air about this big in a typical spore trap. It's about what we have to look at. Uh, this device with an extended sampling ability, your thousands of liters of air, right, are going through this device.
Oh yeah, it's up to 150 liters of air per minute. So you're looking at more like hundreds of thousands of liters of air going through this device.
So
Yeah.
again, so intuitively you'd say that the more air you move through, the more reflective that would be of what maybe is occurring in the space, accounting for all the dynamics that are happening in a space.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And that's been one of
So-
that's I was gonna say that's been one of my trepidations as a consultant all these years, is that we take these 5-minute excursion samples to get a couple cubic feet of air, and then many people in the industry try to extrapolate that into be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for a space, and it's like, whoa, that's a big leap of faith.
So one of the things I put in the article, I think, is just really excites me about something in the future that could and should, in my opinion, be standard in the industry, would be for the restoration contractor. I mean, you can take this Air Answers and run it for up to 5 days. So why not take an Air Answers, put it outside your containment, and run one sample over the 2 or 3 days that you're doing the work to help ensure that you actually have negative pressure and you're not uh, allowing excess spore levels or anything to migrate out of your containment into the occupied areas of the home. And you
Well,
can't do
I'd argue that a
with-
lot of contractors don't want that type of oversight, but that's another story.
and you're right on that. But the point of the matter is that you can't practically do that with a sampling system that has to be changed every 5, or even, go twice as long, go to a 10-minute kind of excursion style sample. And how many of those would you have to run over the course of multiple days as compared to one Air Answers? So different sampling technology, new things that are happening. And I think you're going to see, eventually the industry will pick up on this, and then you're going to see a lot of smart people, smarter than I am, trying to figure out how to use it. And it'll be like spore traps, right? From the standpoint that 20 years ago, they weren't using them the same way that we're using them now.
Well, I mean, let's go way back because we're old guys, right? I mean, back in the original sport trap days, we were greasing our own slides with lithium grease, and I don't know if you were using. I was using an Allergenco, doing the multi traces, which was interesting, but just challenging. We're using a single Burkhardt unit to try to get a sport trap. Sport traps were not easy in the early '90s at all.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna try and one up you there, brother, and say, did you ever use a roto rod where you had to grease the glass rods that spun around in the air?
No, I saw those, and I mean, I could just see a consultant with one of those and a sling psychrometer doing this simultaneously. It just seemed a little crazy.
Well, anyway, let's just say that the technology has improved. But
Sure.
Again, those are the things. If we're not moving forward in the industry, then we're dead, right? So I get a kick out of talking about all the old stuff on occasion and everything, but I don't want to go back to rotor rods. I don't want to go back to greasing my own slides. I don't want to go back to, trying to figure out if I've got the right amount of adhesive in a thin layer right where I need it. That's just crazy talk.
Well, I mean, the ethics, again, if we're trying to capture small particles, and particles, drop out at different rates due to size, you got the Brownian effects, you've got air currents. I mean, there's all these factors that it seems to me the larger volume of air you look at, the more indicative that's going to be of what's happening in the space. No question about it, right? You take a very short excursion, very limited volume, and you take it at one strat or one height, basically. you miss a lot. There's no question about it. So, this is exciting in that regard, and the fact that you can do multiple assays off of a single sample, that seems beneficial.
Oh yeah.
Um, one of the so here's a question for I guess it's more for Rachel, but Michael too. Looking at this, is the time factor one of the reasons that spore traps became popular? Is well, two reasons. Cost, because and now I sound like Monty Python bit. Two of the three reasons, it's basically the cost, the convenience, right? Easy to handle, you know,
Hmm.
almost indestructible, somewhat. And you can have a quick turnaround time. Direct microscopy literally could be read in the field. Somebody could have a field scope and read it right there. So how does that compare to what you're offering with your technology? I know the samples have to be shipped to a lab and analyzed. So turnaround,
Yeah.
what's the turnaround time?
For beta glucan, which is our test for actively growing mold. So we use that as an indicator for actively growing mold in the environment. It's a 24-hour turnaround time once it gets to the laboratory. So it's a pretty good amount of time. And one of the benefits also from using, air answers versus the spore trap is our device. It doesn't just capture the spores, but it also captures the smaller mold fragments in the air, as well as beta glucan itself, which is given off by actively growing mold into the air. So we're able to get a better overall reflection of the mold that's particularly growing in the space versus just a small amount of spores.
And this technology, the device basically it looks like a passive unit, right? But is there a fan, or how does it actually work?
It uses technology called electrokinetic capture. I should have brought kind of a form to show you guys what it looks like. But on the
Mhm.
inside of the device, there is a high voltage wire. Um, when you plug the device in, that high voltage wire causes a congregation of positively charged ions, electrons, and they're moving around the wire. There is with the spore trap, they use like a cassette, the aerosol cassettes. We have a cartridge. So the metal electrodes on that cartridge have a negative charge. So any particulates that come in contact with that positive airflow get captured onto the metal pieces on this cartridge. So there's no pump. It doesn't make any noise. You plug it in. The only way you can tell it's on is there's a ring at the bottom and it lights up green. So it's pretty interesting new technology.
Yeah, so is there an issue with overloading with this type of device? I mean, that's the other question I have. Because Michael and I will both tell you that that's one of the concerns when you use a spore trap, right? Is
Oh, with this, not at
big
all.
intervals and not overloading it so it's not readable.
Mm-hmm. Nope, no overloading issues at all with this type of technology.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean,
So
Michael,
I
your
was just going to,
thoughts. I was gonna say, what elaborate.
anyway, one of the things that's interesting and building on what Rachel just said there is that once you have that capture and then they take it off and they're using that quantitative
Mm-hmm.
polymerase chain reaction, so you are able to look at the fragments and some of the smaller things, and that's why the results come back very much like an ERMI sample, which is using the same sort of technology, and you're getting it reported as spore equivalents rather than just spores. So when we're looking at it optically on a spore trap sample and you've got a broken spore, if if there's not enough of that spore to actually give a positive determination as to what that is, it's in there. It might get counted as miscellaneous or unidentified, but with a qPCR,
Mm-hmm.
you're actually able to take that fragment of a spore, you're extracting some of the DNA from it, and so you're able to tell, as Rachel said earlier, right down to the genus level what that is.
Well, but that's qualitative. So, but I'm also understanding, at least from the article, that there's a quantitative aspect of that as well, right? That you actually can tell the
We do
quantity?
provide the concentration. So our laboratory, as Michael was saying, uses polymerase chain reaction. It's qPCR. It's the same type of methodology that's used when you have a COVID sample and you have it sent in and you have it tested with PCR. So we're looking at the sample down to the genetic material. So even if you have a piece of the spore or smaller fragments, we're able to detect that and to quantify that using this device and our type of testing.
And I mean, again, I've been a big proponent in always looking at any of these indoor environmental investigations, especially mold based ones, at looking at things multiple ways, right? If you just live by one sampling methodology, one technology, in my mind, I think you miss things a lot. You have an opportunity, it's like you have the blinders on. The 6 men from Indostan story with the elephant, it's like it. And I've said that so many times, but it seems like if you look at a very limited window, you get a very limited picture. And I would suggest that a spore trap does give you a certain window of information
Mhm.
that qPCR doesn't. That analyzing for beta D glucan may not. I'm not. In my mind, I'm seeing that as as this is an augment technology. Maybe am I totally off base on that, or how do you guys see it? Well,
I don't think so. I think you're right on because the other analogy that gets used all the time is if the only tool you have in your tool belt is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And if the only thing that you're using is spore traps, then every health issue that somebody brings up or every uh, you know problem that comes about is going to be a mold problem, and that's not the case. I just, as an example, did a rather large inspection, used air answers, used spore traps, used mycotoxin testing, used Instascope, and then even did VOC sampling, and was surprised that the some of the bigger issues were the VOCs as compared to some of the mold things. They were all there. They were all all sorts of things going on in the home, but the volatile organic, the chemicals, are something that uh, was probably one of the most important aspects of the findings as compared to some of the other things.
yeah, and I think there has been with the advent of these sport trap cassettes, and there's several different brands out there. Um, I think there's been maybe a flood of people into the industry that maybe are, I'm not going to say ill-informed, but maybe not fully educating on understanding what they're doing, and they use that as their pass fail for an environment. A sport trap reading in an environment is either good or bad. But it's like, yeah, that's one like small piece of the puzzle, clearly. And it seems like at least this technology, that your company's bringing to the table, Rachel, at least has the opportunity to do multiple assays and look at multiple parameters simultaneously. So
Oh, yeah.
that seems valuable
Hmm.
for a longer excursion too. Um, but
Exactly.
the efficacy for the 1 hour excursion, though, I mean, I looked at the limited data in the article, and it did look like you had it lined up similar, the beta glucan analysis in a 1 hour sample versus the longer duration samples.
Hmm.
So has that been what you've seen in the in the use of this device? Is like the shorter
That
excursions are okay?
is, we do have the ability to do the 1 hour samples, and we have done quite a bit of testing, so we've been able to validate that we're able to do that. I will say that similar to using the 1 hour sample and the spore traps, if somebody's coming into the room and kicking up a bunch of things, you're going to see that peak, even if you have that 1 hour sampler that you are running. So if you're going to do the 1 hour sample, it's best to do it in a room where people aren't going to be moving around a whole bunch and possibly kicking up that mold into the air. Um, so with the 1 hour sample, what's not the 1 hour, but with the 24 hour, you're not seeing that variability. over a period of time. So you're getting a big overall picture. The 1 hour, it does work really well, but again, I wouldn't be running around and moving around it, because if there's any big peak, or if it captures a large amount of mold that's going to the air all at once, it's going to show up high.
But so I mean, you're doing this more of a quiescent type sampling methodology, right? Where you're just trying to just get what's happening. There's been a lot of discussion in the industry of doing uh, either I'm going to get the term wrong here. Aggressive sampling has been used in asbestos, but the augmented type sampling protocols for spore traps, where you actually do so you generate some disturbance in the space.
Mhm.
Um, so that's something that again you're looking at more. You're looking at a longer term excursion for the collection time, as opposed to a 5 minute spore trap where you're really
Correct.
trying to get a profile of a space very quickly. So
Mhm.
so I guess the enhanced sampling protocols with your technology wouldn't make sense, right? They would probably skew it.
Well, I mean, it's going to be similar to what you would see with particularly the spore trap itself, because the spore trap, even though you're running it for a short period of time, it is very susceptible to any kind of variability in the air. I mean, you can run it in one area for a short period of time, and then you can run that area again next hour and get completely different results. So,
Sure. Well, you can
it,
run them side by
it,
side and get different results. I mean, come on,
exactly,
you know,
exactly. So this is the same. You run it for an hour. If a bunch of people are kicking things around it, you might see that little bit of increase. And so it is a little more susceptible to any kind of variability, versus the 24-hour, which you're not going to see. If someone kicks a bunch of mold around in the room, you're not going to see that high peak. You're going to see it all kind of balance out, so that you're going to get a better picture of everything that's going in the particular room for that period of time. But we have validated the 1 hour. The 1 hour does work if you want to use it for a shorter period of time. If you want to get in and out of an establishment, you have to get in there, and you're doing a bunch of things and set it up, and you can get out, and that's fine too, and that works just as well. But like the spore trap, you're going to deal with a little bit of variability.
which makes total sense.
I
So
would.
elephant in the room, pricing, because obviously spore traps became maybe the favorite son due to speed, right? Being able to turn around
Yeah.
rapidly, and because they got very cost competitive as far as the services, analysis services got fairly inexpensive. So how are we stacking up? You have multiple assays here. I know qPCR isn't inexpensive. So where are we at with this?
Well, what's interesting about using our device is you don't have to use multiple aerosol cassettes. So when you're doing spore collection, you're going to use multiple in different areas of the house, and you got an outside sample. With our device, you use just one per area, a 2,500 square foot home, or if it's a larger establishment, then you might want to put one on, another floor or something like that, and just keep all the doors on the internal side open, so it gets a good reflection of what you're being exposed to on a regular basis. But when you look at the price cost with the spore collection and the number of samples that you're going to need versus one of ours, it ends up actually being cheaper to use just ours.
Okay. I mean, that's fair enough.
So,
Eh,
Bob,
Michael,
I'm going
yeah,
to jump in on that if you don't
please
mind.
do.
And I, and I understand, it's not a perfect world, and we do have to consider cost and everything. But I just share with you the majority of inspections that I'm doing these days. Uh, they want answers, and that's why we're doing multiple different types of sampling, and that is going to drive up the cost. So one of the things I like about the air answers is that I can take that test and I can send it in for the mold uh, uh, assay, so to speak. And then if it turns out that that doesn't help me, or maybe I don't send it in for the mold, I send it in for the mycotoxins because I got spore trap side by side or something that is going to give me the mold information until I see something unusual. And then I'm able to go back to the Air Answers lab and say, well, okay, I didn't initially want the mold stuff. I only wanted the mycotoxins, but now I want the mold. Or I didn't want mold or the mycotoxins. I'm trying to control my costs. I only wanted the beta glucans, but now I see some stuff. So I want you to go back and take a look at this. And that ability, from my standpoint, to go back and relook at that sample and actually run different analysis. And this is coming from a guy who really understands the spore traps and knows that I can go back and reanalyze the spore traps, but I'm getting the same, I'm basically getting the same information, whereas they're able to do the analysis in different ways and give me completely different information. That is cool from my perspective.
And is the same collection cassette capable of doing the allergen sampling simultaneously, or is that a separate? Do you have a separate collection device for that? I'm just
With the
curious.
allergen, no, it actually, if you want to, let's say you want to do a mold test and you want to run it over a 5-day period of time, the allergens have to be done due to our testing and the type of sampling we've done. It has to be over a 5-day period of time to get an
Okay.
overall accurate picture
Mhm.
of some of these allergens, especially if you're looking at like cockroach and everything that are going to be on the lower end of the spectrum.
Sure.
But you could do, let's say you do a beta glucan assay, which is our actively growing mold screening assay. You can add on other, like our genera testing, our mycotoxin testing. We have a new panel coming out for immunocompromised individuals. You can add that onto it. So we keep it in the laboratory for 60 days. So you can add on these different types of testing.
Got it. And that can be from one collected 5-day sample.
Yes.
Can do all that. Okay. That's
Yeah,
advantageous. Yeah.
5-day sample. And the 5 days if you want to add on if you want to have the allergen testing.
Mhm.
But if you have a 1-hour beta glucan sample that you want to do, and we have it in the laboratory, you can ask us, hey, can you test it for mycotoxins? Can you
Mhm.
test it for mold genera? So we have the ability to keep it for 60 days so people can add on other testing as needed.
So I've got to raise the question too with mycotoxin testing. At least it's the general school of thought, I think, in the industry is that it's mainly collected via surface sampling more so than
Mhm.
than air sampling. So have you been doing that? Like, I guess what have you seen the results? Because the study didn't seem to detect mycotoxin. But again, 5 samples. That's not very many, or 5 sample sites. Um,
We have been seeing it in quite a few samples.
have you? Okay.
Yeah, so we have, and what we're detecting itself is it's the type of assay we're doing is an expression assay. So we're looking at the mold that's expressing the particular mycotoxins. So when it's in the when it's actively expressing a particular mycotoxin, that's what we're detecting.
Okay.
So
Explain that.
it's like,
I was like, the term expressing. I
Well, the
don't want to
thing
sound
is,
ignorant,
we're
but
looking at
what?
like certain laboratories that are looking at parts per billion mycotoxins. They're detecting the chemical itself.
Okay.
What we're detecting is the mold that's expressing the mycotoxin. So when that particular mold is expressing mycotoxin, we're able to detect that part that it's expressing.
So what happens, Bob, just as
Well,
the
it's giving it
layperson's,
off.
yeah, the layperson's analogy here is that if you have ever seen any of those super micrograph pictures of the mold spores, and they blow them up like 100,000 times or something like that,
Sure.
and the mycotoxins are essentially exuded or expressed or
Release.
released, pressed out, and they're heavier compounds. I mean, when you see them on these photographs, like I said, these greatly magnified photographs, it actually looks like little tar balls or something that's
Mhm.
coming right out of the edge of the spore. So um, that's for the standard surface mycotoxin testing. And I have to admit, I'm not, a laboratory person like Rachel, but they actually have to get some of that liquid that's that then volatilizes and gets into the air. That's what they have to get for the mycotoxin testing from the surface. That's also my understanding of what they're measuring on the biological samples of the mycotoxin when they get somebody's urine and check that for mycotoxins. They're literally checking the residue from that mold spore. And Rachel's process there at Air Answers, they're looking at the spores, and they have a way of identifying which of those spores are at the point where they're pressing out or releasing that mycotoxin.
Okay.
Mhm.
That's what I'm here for, by the way. I take all this scientific stuff and I try and make it in a
I,
Well,
in a way that
that,
you're really good at it. So
people understand. Well, that's, quite honestly, that's
but
what I've
that's
been
part of the
doing for
business.
yeah,
multi
yeah.
multiple decades, is to take scientific stuff and understand it enough that you can explain it in layperson's terms. And
Mhm.
I think that's why I'm successful as an instructor as well. I can
Yeah.
share that with people.
Well, I
So
mean, that's critically important. I mean, especially, clients, certainly, it's easy to recognize that with consumers, residential lay people, but even people that are facilities managers and, they're not experts in these areas. They
No,
call
not
it.
at all.
So I found in my career, 35 plus years, always, I'm always been spending a lot of time educating people. You have to
Mhm.
explain, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? What is the logic behind it? Um,
I don't want to lose the point there on the mycotoxins if I can for a minute, just
sure.
to, again, keep completing these loops so that the audience here understands a little bit better about some of the capabilities of the Air Answer. And that is that um, we do have the ability to analyze mycotoxins from surface samples. We have had the ability for several years now to analyze, as I said, mycotoxins in biological samples. To be able to take this leap and determine mycotoxins in the air, uh, as I said at the beginning of the show, this is one of the areas that just truly intrigues me, because I think that we're going to be able to start making more and more connections between environments and people's health. And we already know the allergens and the chemicals and just the regular dust particles and all sorts of things, mold spores, all of that has an impact on people's health.
Mhm.
And the more we can understand about how the mycotoxins impact it, I think the better off we're going to be. And so this particular technology in that arena just really seems to me to be something I'd love to see more people get involved with and more testing done, and collating data not from 5 houses but 50 houses,
Sure.
500 houses,
Yeah.
and start to see what those numbers look like.
Well, being able to understand the pathways seems really important too. Because again, a lot of, we've got a lot of data on mycotoxins being ingested and what clinically happens with that. There's tons of data on that.
Correct.
But the inhalation pathway has always been the one that's been suspect. And everybody says we don't know enough. And we haven't had a way to really analyze, that in an aerosolized form really very well.
Mhm.
And worse yet, I would go farther as to say that the aerosolized or inhalation of the mycotoxins has been rejected by a lot of people as having enough impact on individuals to actually be creating some of these ill
Mhm.
health consequences. So I'm interested in disproving that non-scientific assessment at this point.
Well, I'm very interested in getting more scientific assessment and learning more. Because I mean, I think we're still at in many ways at the infantile stages, especially at this industry with dealing with assessing mold and understanding the correlation with the human health impacts. I mean, like what spores per cubic meter, what does that mean to an individual, like that concentration of aerosolized in an environment, what is the physiological effect on an individual? We don't we don't know that really. um,
And how do you take that and match that with each individual? You've got not only the environment and the concentration, but the individual genetics of each person. Uh, these are these are questions that I think that we're getting closer to answering, and we're certainly starting to see some correlations. But we absolutely need to keep going here.
yeah, I mean, they're super challenging questions. And Michael, so you've been dealing with this, in the industry for 4 plus decades. You don't look that old, but anyway, it, But you have to acknowledge that it is a challenge, right? I mean, this is certainly we get called on to go in as consultants, professionals get called on to go into buildings, go into facilities, whether it be somebody's residence or a commercial facility, public facility, and we're starting at ground zero and trying to there's so many different layers potentially, right, in an indoor environmental investigation. Certainly biologicals could be part of it, but often they're not the only thing, and I think it's hard. It's very hard to try to communicate this information to the variety of clients we have to deal with, right? So they think we're going to have a tricorder like Star Trek and have a device, and Scotty's there, or what, or Doc is all, with the tricorder, seeing whether everything's good or bad, and test our air. How do we get past that, and how do we educate the public more, especially? And I'm gonna add a piece to this. We're coming off, or at least starting to get to a waning point with this global pandemic. I mean, certainly it's not over, but we have an acute, I think, awareness in the general public of indoor environmental issues now, right? Air issues. People are a little more tuned to that, having had 2+ years of this pandemic. So how do we take that and translate that into moving this forward and making, uh, you know, substantive change and, positive actions? I'm going to throw that at you, Michael, with all your years of wisdom.
Well, I appreciate that. So
No, you don't.
um, the the quick rephrase of that question is that people expect us to have answers, and many times we can provide answers. And I don't want to overemphasize the few cases where we can't, but the reality of the situation is that given the limits that we're seeing in terms of how we can do sampling and what we can do from an investigation standpoint and all of the rest of it, there are some cases that it's just difficult to come up with an answer. And I that's why I'm so excited about the Air Answers, because it's another tool that we can utilize to help resolve some of these questions in our clients' minds. And just like anything else, like we've been talking about throughout this, you have to know what the capabilities are of the tool. You have to use it properly, and you have to know how to interpret the information. And we're just at the front end of the curve with the Air Answers on answering some of those, or addressing some of those issues of it. And that's why I continue to say I see a bright future for it. Uh, because it fills in some gaps that we have
Mhm.
when we're using other pieces of technology. And regardless of that, regardless of the fact that we now have Air Answers, there's still going to be some, situations and some questions that we can't answer, all the homeowners or the business owners' concerns, because it's,
What's a
it's,
complex mix?
yeah, it's a real
It
world, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many potential constituents and factors involved here, a lot of variables. This is not, again, there isn't a single device that analyzes. There's not a single parameter, and then physiologically, all of us humans react different to these different constituents. So, in many cases, so it's challenging.
Exactly. And the one that I was telling you about earlier, I mean, all these years of experience, and it certainly seemed like this was going to be a mold issue, and there's water damage, and we're finding pressure differentials and all this other stuff. And as it turned out, this case in the Washington, D.C. area, the VOCs, the chemicals, the one of the basic steps that we take in terms of some of our, indoor air quality analysis for the last 25 years, turned out to be probably the biggest factor that's impacting the people in that home.
We have a question from the audience. I'm going to read this question just because it'll take too long to get it up on the Cryon. It's from Terry Sofer. Hi, Terry. Happy you're here. His comment was, not every mold spore in the air has mycotoxins, so what? And no surprise. That does not mean no health hazards. Uh, Not expecting mycotoxin in every spore for a variety of reasons. If mycotoxin and non-mycotoxin species are present at some point, mycotoxins emit or can be emitted, and all molds are allergens. Mycotoxins are emitted by all cells of mycotoxic species, not only by spores. That was, I know it's a long one.
Okay.
It was a lot of words there, and that's why I didn't try to even bring it across here. So I guess the question is, whether or not it is. I guess the question here is the mycotoxin actually the litmus test we should be looking for or not? Uh, I think,
Uh,
to paraphrase.
well, the mycotoxin itself, it doesn't have to be just the spore. That's correct. It could be other parts of the mold that's expressing this particular mycotoxin in the air. Um, we're just now kind of starting to collect this information. We've got quite a bit of information so far that we were able to detect the mycotoxins in the air. So the types that we are detecting are actually being released. Now, further down the line, once we collect, thousands of particular samples, we can go back and do kind of a meta-analysis of, the where they were detected, what the genus is, because we also looked at the mold genera in those types and those samples as well. So we can do kind of an overall comparison and learn some more information about that. But right now we're just starting to see detection of this in the air.
Great.
And
I don't know if I responded well to that, but
I,
Well,
I
I'm
think that was solid.
yeah, I'm not sure how to separate the question out of there from some of the statements,
Yeah,
but
it was more, and it was a long one. It was a long one.
yeah, but I do agree with what Rachel said from the standpoint that, and our questioner, from the standpoint
Yeah.
that yes, a lot of the different molds that are called toxigenic mold can release the mycotoxins, and as I was explaining earlier, they don't always do that. But the fact that they're there and there's those types, I absolutely agree. That means that if the conditions change, the environmental conditions change,
Mhm.
that patch of Stachybotrys that wasn't producing stachycillin yesterday or this morning could start doing that. Uh, I'm not sure how you get around that in terms of other than having these different sampling methods and having as much information as possible and not ignoring the implications of that. If I have Stachybotrys in the air, that's a bad sign to me. If I have
Mhm.
Stachybotrys in the air on a spore trap sample and I've got stachycillin expressed and captured in the air answer sample, that's another piece of the puzzle that's
Sure.
telling me not only is it possible, but at that time that I was sampling, it was actually happening. So to me, that's additional information to give to the homeowner, and particularly if that homeowner is having health effects that their doctor or their functional medicine person has said could be related to the mycotoxins in their system. So
Well, I mean, clearly, if we look at it just through one lens, right, one sampling methodology or one way of, looking at the environment, it's like trying to understand what a jigsaw puzzle looks like holding one piece, right? And so the more pieces of the puzzle we have, I guess to summarize, the better picture we get of what we're actually looking at, and we can make more of a informed observation and decision of as to what's occurring and what to be done with it. So this is exciting stuff. So I'm really, I love the articles. I love that was up there. Rachel, I'm happy that you were able to come here and talk a little bit of
Yeah.
tech on the
Thanks for
products.
having me. Yeah.
And Michael, it's always a pleasure to have you. Anyway, it's like you you bring an interesting, very calm
I
perspective to
know. He's
things. Yeah,
such
I
a
know.
calming.
Yeah, he's more
calming
calming than me. I have a tendency to get more erratic. So one of the things I do want to mention. So many of you may be watching this broadcast on somewhere else other than our online community. You may be seeing it anywhere, actually, and any number of other places, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. But I would like to point out that we do have the online community, and it's something that you may be interested in. If you're not part of it, you're not watching it there. This is an online portal that we launched at Healthy Indoors a while back. Now we're going full blown and pushing it, and it's a networking platform. If you notice as you look at it, it looks a lot like a social media platform, but it's a bit more than that. It's social media plus content plus live streaming plus on and on and on. And we have that ability to actually mold it into whatever we want. So we're super excited about this platform, and we're really encouraging people to take a look at it. It's you can learn more about it at global.healthyindoors.com. If you're already watching the show there, you can poke around. Obviously, getting a membership gets you a lot more access to it, so we'd highly recommend that. Certainly, I'd like to again thank our guests joining us today, Michael Pinto and Rachel Robele. Great to have you guys here. It was an interesting discussion. I'm sure we're going to hear more about this technology and applications for it going forward. So thanks again, guys. It was great. It was great.
Well, thank
Well,
you.
Robert, you're always interesting and fun person to chat with, and I'm hoping that maybe next time it will be at one of the conferences, and there can be an adult beverage in our hands.
Ooh, well, see, don't tease me that way. No, yes, I do like having an adult beverage in my hand. I'm no stranger to that. And an in-person conference would be good. It's again, there's a lot of questions online about whether we're quite ready to have massive gatherings together, and how long we're still going to have these hybrid online and in-person events, maybe forever. Which makes sense. So yeah, I guess with that. We're at the end of our time for this week because it always goes so fast. Um, we have next week coming up next Thursday. Michael Rubino will be joining us as our guest, and we'll have some interesting conversation with him. He'll be a first-time guest on the Healthy Endurance Show, so we're looking forward to that. Following week, we have Jay West coming in from Chicagoland. He is one of our co-hosts on the monthly After Hours show, and that'll be interesting. So we're looking forward to both of those. So until next week, we'll be back here again next Thursday from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time for the Healthy Indoors Show. I'm Bob Krell. Thanks for joining us this week, and looking forward to see you again soon.